This video topic had a terrifying start. Its conception was Buildzoid, who came to me and said, I want to do something. And that is an immediate sign that you should be afraid. So Buildzoid wanted to provide a custom BIOS for RX 570 that had some timings tweaks to it. This is something that you might have done a year or 2 years ago if you were mining or something like that. But you can also do some timings tweaks that might affect performance in things like games. And so we started the idea with a custom BIOS and with some memory timing tuning on the video card, so for the RX 570, and expanded from there to use AMD's built-in timing tuning through their drivers. Today we're looking at how that affects performance, if at all, between an RX 570 and Vega 56. Before that, this video is brought to you by Drop and their HD 6XX headphones. The 6XX headphones offer high-quality audio output with wide device compatibility. Massdrop's 6XX also includes a 6-foot cable with 3.5mm plug alongside a 1/4-inch adapter for those who might want to plug into an amp. The 6XX focuses its energy into balancing the sound, leaning toward warmer and bassier audio. They're also easy to disassemble and replace individual parts, making these headphones trivial to maintain for long-term use. Learn more at the link below. This content ended up being really straightforward. So unfortunately, the BIOS that we applied from Buildzoid, we did have issues getting it to really work properly. It worked, it applied. Buildzoid did provide a BIOS that just changed the memory strap, and the end result was, using the different variants that Buildzoid supplied us, the card was just not stable. It was freezing, it was crashing, it just couldn't complete benchmarks. So there is more tuning we can do. And for this specific card, it was just struggling, so we might need a different video card with different memory modules or something. But there's still stuff we can do through software, through third-party software, especially from AMD. There's a lot of memory tools out there for various AMD devices, CPUs and GPUs alike. So there's software we can use. But what we ended up doing for this one is just sticking with the AMD drivers, because ages ago when Scott Wasson visited us, we said we wanted to benchmark the AMD timing tuning utility in the new driver set. That tuning utility is really just a drop down. So it's got automatic, which is stock, so that's the stock timings. So when you're thinking of different memory timings for GPUs, you have GDDR5 and HBM. These are different from DDR, but in some sense, the actual timing options are similar. It's just the numbers will be different, and there are a few different options mixed in there as well. So it's very simple for the drivers. It's automatic, which is stock, level 1, which we don't know exactly what that does. It's all hidden in the software, or level 2. Don't know what that does either. But we tested those 3, and then hopefully our plan is to either work with Buildzoid and get a BIOS for a different card that'll accept it and run without crashing, or use a software utility to do manual per timing tuning on GPUs, which we're not particularly skilled at because we've never had to do it, but it's something we could hack around with and see if there's any difference in the results when changing the memory timings for the video card. All we're doing for these tests then is running the RX 570 and Vega 56 through some benchmarks with the AMD driver changes to level 1, level 2 timings. We did a lot of test passes. So for Firestrike and for TimeSpy, it ran dozens of test passes per line in the chart, and that allows us to establish a really tight tolerance for error, so we can see exactly how much variance there is. And then for games, we ran the usual games and test passes. We did validation passes for these old stock results, so those have been updated for this test. And then the rest of it is, well, it's stuff like we did testing with and without rebooting, and that didn't change anything either. So let's get through the results and talk about the data, if AMD's driver utility for memory timings does anything in games and gaming workloads, which Firestrike and TimeSpy are. A quick note as well. Our understanding is that these were initially introduced to the AMD drivers because crypto miners were doing timing tuning, and it actually did matter. It actually, in cryptocurrency and mining, our understanding from speaking with Buildzoid and AMD is that it really did influence the performance. Games are different, a lot different. They're so different that with cryptocurrency mining, you can plug into an X1 PCIe slot and you're fine. With games, if you do that, you're completely ruined for your performance. So they behave very differently, and this is why the performance in gaming is going to be a lot different than what you'd see in crypto mining in terms of the improvement from using these drivers. So let's get into the numbers. After running dozens of tests, we found Firestrike to have a standard deviation of about 0.22 FPS for Graphics 1 and 0.06 FPS for Graphics 2 with the RX 570 and for Vega 56. For the Gigabyte RX 570 with stock timings, we measured Graphics 1 at 65.56 FPS average across more than a dozen test passes, with Graphics 2 at 52.2 FPS average. And Graphics 2 will be more accurate of the two numbers and should also be more sensitive to memory changes. Memory timings level 1 put the Graphics 1 score at 65.83 FPS average, a difference of plus 0.27 FPS. Considering the standard deviation of 0.22 FPS for this test, this is not a meaningful difference. The result of 66.03 follows the upward trend begun by timings level 1 and does technically exit deviation against stock even at the extremes, but only barely. We still can't confidently state if the difference is statistically significant, but it does appear to have an uptick in performance. Even if it does perform better than stock, though, the gains are irrelevant for this workload. Graphics 2 shows more meaningful gains if looked at from the perspective of error, but they are still meaningless to the user. These differences would be undetectable to a human, even overclocked, and with memory overclocks, the difference between memory timings at stock and level 2, whatever that means, is effectively zero. Vega 56 showed a range of 0.17 from top to bottom of the average results in Graphics 1, or 0.15 FPS for Graphics 2. Technically, we see a decline in these results, but they are mostly within error. We cannot state any meaningful difference once again. TimeSpy has much closer final results than Firestrike, with a standard deviation of about 0.03 FPS run-to-run for both graphics tests. And by the way, that's another couple dozen tests per device on the chart. For this one, the RX 570 stock moves from 25.59 FPS Graphics 1 to 25.91 FPS for memory timings level 2. Although this is statistically significant as a change based on our error from TimeSpy itself, we're still too close to feel comfortable declaring a meaningful result. Remember that although we know TimeSpy's variance, computers are complicated and could have unknown background tasks that may cause interference that could affect the numbers beyond what we see as our error for TimeSpy in this benchmark. Either way, under the best case, assuming that we are perfectly 100% accurate, we could declare an increase maximally of 1.25%. Graphics 2 shows an increase of 0.24 FPS for the RX 570 from stock to timings level 2, a gain of 1.1%, assuming again perfectly accurate results. Timing differences with an overclock are also insignificant, although looser timings may allow for higher overclocks, assuming we had the level of control required to actually manually push down the timings. And there's software that kind of does that, and we've begun playing around with it, but it's not necessarily so trivial. Vega 56 again plots a downtrend from stock, but like with the RX 570, we don't have full confidence to declare changes without making some assumptions. Assuming again that the numbers are 100% perfectly accurate, which is unlikely when talking about such small changes, the Vega 56 slight decays in performance with the other timing levels would be mismatched from what we saw with the RX 570. That said, they use different types of memory and memory subsystems. More realistically, all these numbers are too close to call. Far Cry 5 at 1080p has the RX 570 4GB stock card at 62 FPS average, with lows at 54 for 1% and 50 for 0.1%. The memory timing level 2 configuration puts us at 60.6 FPS average, 52 FPS 1%, and 50 FPS 0.1%. These results were consistent and within 0.5 FPS average run-to-run. We can't declare an improvement for memory timing level 2, although we also can't necessarily confidently state that it diminishes performance either. It does look that way here, but we're also close enough to error that we have to settle for calling it unnoticeable, if different at all. Vega 56 ran at 98 FPS average stock and 97.8 FPS average with level 2 timings, so we again observed no change. 1440p further demonstrates a lack of difference. Our stock results were at 43.9 FPS average, with memory timing level 2 at 43.4 FPS average, and this is well within error margins. We did see more variable 0.1% low performance here, but it's hard to know the precise cause of this as the dataset is more limited. The 0.1% low range was wider for the changed memory timings, potentially indicating some instability or memory errors, assuming this change in software is working to begin with. This is also something we commonly see with memory overclocking when pushing too hard. At 1440p, Vega 56 reference reported 68.6 FPS average with timing level 2 version at 68.4 FPS average, so no difference here once again. GTA 5 at 1080p put the RX 570 at 62.6 FPS average with lows at 47.6 and 45. The memory timing level 2 test was almost exactly identical. It almost seems like nothing even happened. We're at 62.2 FPS average, 47.6 for 1%, and 45.1 for 0.1%. That's not functionally the same, but in some instances, literally the same. There's no difference here. Vega 56 had us at 94.6 FPS average, which is the same as level 2 timings changing, and it's 94.8 FPS average. Lows are a little more variable at the 0.1% mark with the timings change, but there's naturally more variance in 0.1% anyway, so it's difficult to determine the exact cause. 1440p has the RX 570 at 42.7 FPS average and 42.5 FPS average for memory timings level 2. Lows are at 32.8 for each, and about 31 to 32 for 0.1% lows, which is within error. There's no difference between these. Vega 56 ends up at 66.4 FPS average in both tests, so no difference again. And finally, the last one we're showing is F1 2018. For this one, we observed the RX 570 at 66.3 FPS average when run stock, 65.9 when run with memory timings level 2. And again, we can't really see a difference here. 1440p testing had the two cards once again identical, 51.6 versus 50.9, which is within error margins, and those were unaffected. We did have more games, but you get the idea. They're all the same. The other games we tested, like Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Sniper Elite 4, were also the same, but there's no point in showing more charts. Not super exciting then. No real differences in the tests we ran. There were some that were sort of bordering on maybe a difference, and that was typically more along the lines of timing level 2, potentially introducing some lower 0.1% lows than we would expect. However, that 0.1% low value is already a really narrow data set, so we don't have as much data to average against. We don't have as much data to check for things like margin of error, and so the margin is going to be wider, and it's difficult to actually confidently state if there's a meaningful difference there. But overall, it looks like no, not really. So we're not 100% sure if the driver option is doing anything, and if it is, it doesn't appear to be working, well, it doesn't appear to be influencing the gaming results, even if it's working. It might influence mining results, but we're not going to run those tests now. There's not much interest in it anyway, and we're not experts in figuring out how to even check for how to benchmark that performance. So what we're left with is the next step, if this topic is of interest to you, is for us to attempt to manually tune the timings through software, or to work with BuildZoid on building a BIOS for a card that will more readily accept it, because this one just, like I said, it froze, it crashed, it didn't like any of the things that BuildZoid was trying to do. So unfortunately, the custom BIOS was a no-go for this one from the start. One final note here is that one thing we don't really have the sample size to analyze is that changing the timings, if you make them looser, would theoretically increase your headroom for frequency overclocking. This is something that Roman der Bauer found with, I believe it was the 780 Ti, where when they loosened the timings, they were able to get a higher frequency. And that makes sense. You see the same thing with DRAM and system memory. So that's a potential item of note where you'd actually see some realistic outcome or meaningful outcome where there's a result difference, but it's not one that's really worth testing with the AMD drivers, because we don't even know what they're doing to the timings precisely. So that's it for this one. Subscribe for more. We'll probably do a follow-up on this if you're interested. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up the mod mats. The medium and large are both back in stock, especially the medium has been sold out immediately when we did the first run. So that's back. It's shipping now. You can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to get access to the behind-the-scenes videos. I'll see you all next time.